Hi friends, welcome back to Faith and Arrow Homestead. My name is Jaylee and guess where we are? We are in my kitchen. It's been a minute since we've been in here together making anything, but you know we are winding down the year and we're getting into that season. And so it is time for me to bring you a recipe, and I have a cookie recipe. It's the cookie recipe that I referenced in my last video, and smile on my face. Let's go. Let's make some cookies. So this is a sourdough chocolate chip cookie recipe. It is a recipe adapted from a recipe, posted in a Facebook group somewhere that I've adapted. So I couldn't give you credit if I wanted to. And I've made them several times now after making a few tweaks, and I'm really, really happy with them. Mind you, these are a sourdough discard recipe. You can also use active sourdough starter, but it makes no difference. It's not being used as... Sorry, so many phone calls this morning. I can't remember what I was saying. Sourdough doesn't have to be active. It's just a discard recipe. And then the sourdough isn't actually doing anything in this recipe. It'll give you a slightly little bit of sourdough flavor, but we're not long fermenting this. There aren't going to be crazy sourdough health benefits or anything like that. But I like being able to say they're sourdough. And this cookie, as you'll see if you make these, they're just the perfect chocolate chip cookie. So if it does nothing else, it just gives you that perfect, slightly crispy on the outside, soft and chewy on the inside. It spreads beautifully. It looks beautiful. It's a beautiful chocolate chip cookie. So even though it doesn't necessarily have the crazy sourdough health benefits, it's still... It's my go-to chocolate chip cookie from now on, hands down, 100%. So we're going to start. I'm over here by the stove, and I'm going to turn it on medium-low heat, and you need 2 sticks or 1 cup of butter, and this is actually, the full title is Brown Butter Sourdough Chocolate Chip Cookies. I won't make chocolate chip cookies, really hardly any cookies anymore, without first browning the butter, because it gives it a wonderful caramely, slightly nutty flavor when you brown the butter, and it makes them a little bit darker in color, and it's just a really easy, amazing way to enhance and lift the flavor of whatever it is you're making. So once you get your butter into your pan, of course I'm using cast iron, you're just going to melt that. Little piece of advice, because I never do it, but I always should. If you cut it into little pieces, it'll melt much faster. When you put the sticks in like this, it takes a lot longer for it to melt, but whatever. And so yeah, I'm just going to melt that, and then I'm going to turn the camera down to the pan so that you can see it. I have showed you on this channel before how to brown butter. I have a chocolate chip skillet cookie recipe, like what you can order in restaurants when the whole skillet is the chocolate chip cookie. You put ice cream on top and eat it with a fork. That's one of Tom's favorite desserts. So I have shown you how to make that before, and I brown the butter for that as well. But it's been some time now, and I have so many new subscribers. So I am going to go through that process again. It's very, very simple, but there is a little bit of finesse involved and a little bit of... once you've done it a time or two, you'll really know what you're looking for, but the first time it can be like, am I doing this right? So I will show you how to do it. It is famously difficult to see in cast iron because the bottom of the pan is obviously black, so you can't see the color change quite as well, but there are little things that you can look for to help you tell what's happening. So right now, as you can hopefully see, this is still really yellow, very yellow, and it's got some white foam on top. And so this is absolutely nowhere near ready, which of course we're only just in the very beginning. We're getting started here. So I always like to use a whisk, and you just have to keep it moving because those milk solids will eventually drop to the bottom. That's kind of what we're trying to do here. And they can burn very quickly. And if you have burnt it, don't use it in your cookie recipe. It's not going to taste good. It's going to make your cookies taste burnt. So it's really important that you keep it moving. It's getting foamier and foamier, and it's supposed to. You'll start to see that underneath the foam, it's simmering. You've got little bubbles, and that's fine. I like to keep my heat on medium-low because you don't need this to get too hot. But it is going to start really bubbling and simmering, and you just keep stirring it. So I'm going to stop whisking just for a second so you can hopefully hear. Do you hear the noise that that's making? That is the water in the bubble, or excuse me, the water in the butter being cooked off, and that's good. That's what you want. And it's going to be loud and make noise like that for a couple of minutes, and just keep stirring. Don't stop stirring. You got to stand right here. This is not something that you can walk away from. It's starting to change color. Can you see that in the camera? It used to be a light yellow color, and it's turning darker. And the foam is dissipating. See that? How the foam is almost gone now? It's still making noise. Okay, now you're looking for, cause we're almost done. We're at the moment of action here. So there's 3 things that are gonna happen. It's gonna get quieter. It's not there yet, but it will. It's gonna get quieter, and the color is gonna change. It's going to very suddenly start to darken, and the smell is going to change. So far it has just smelled like hot butter, but it's going to start smelling more caramely, more nutty, a deeper kind of smell, less like normal butter. When you're cooking it on cast iron, when you're doing this on cast iron, the color change is going to be right in the middle there. So kind of keep your eyes there. Keep watching. Listen. Much quieter now. A lot of that water has cooked off. The milk solids, although you can't see it, are starting to drop to the bottom, and those are what's going to brown for brown butter. It's hardly bubbling at all anymore. Do you see that? All those big bubbles are mostly gone. It kind of foamed up a little bit again. Okay, there. So you see that? It's starting to turn color. It's starting to get a little darker. As soon as it does that, when you're cooking with cast iron on gas, I turn it off because it's going to stay hot for a minute anyway. Oh, beautiful. It's nice. It's dark. I don't know if you'll be able to really see that on the camera, and I'm sorry. Oh, no, it looks like you can. See how that's dark there? We've browned it. It's brown. And you really have to watch it, because as soon as that happens and it turns over like that, you got to turn the heat off or you're going to burn it. And you don't want that. But that's a lovely, nice golden brown color. It smells amazing. I can't really describe it to you. You'll have to experience it for yourself. But the scent really very drastically changes quickly. And that's how you know you've browned it. Amazing. That's so good. That's going to be amazing in our chocolate chip cookies. All right, next up, while our butter is still pretty good and hot, I like to add our sugar. So, saved it. So you have 1 cup of regular white sugar. Of course, I use an unbleached sugar from a cane sugar from Azure Standard, so it looks brown, but that's just regular cane sugar. So I'm going to add 1 cup of that in there. And then we're also going to add 1 cup of packed brown sugar. There's 2 cups of sugar in this cookie recipe, and I realize that's a lot. They're cookies. I'm not looking for them to be healthy, so I don't mind. Plus, this recipe makes a lot of cookies. Usually I can get round about 20 good-sized cookies. I think you could get even more if you made them smaller. So it's a pretty hefty recipe. So we're just going to get that mixed in, and I'm just going to go ahead and let you know ahead of time that your mouth is going to water, because the brown butter with the sugar smells, it's like it should not be legal how good it smells. It's amazing. When I get to heaven, that's what I'm going to be greeted with, is the smell of brown butter and sugar on a hot cast iron skillet. It's ridiculous. So just combining that, that's all. You can do this step later. I like to do it now because I find it much easier to mix the sugar in with the warm butter than when the butter has cooled, because that's the next step. We can't move on to the next part of this recipe until this butter has cooled down, because the next thing that we're going to add are egg yolks, and if you were to put those in now, they would scramble because this is so hot. So we have to wait for it to cool quite a bit. Maybe just a little warmer than room temperature. I usually like to just leave it and move on to another kitchen task, which is exactly what I'm going to do. In fact, the camera angle is such that you cannot see my kitchen because it is a mess. And I usually like to clean it before I film, but I figured this needs to sit anyway. So the best use of my time would be to get the butter browned, get the sugar mixed in, let that sit and cool, and I will clean the kitchen and get it ready for the next part of this video. So I'll see you in about an hour. Okay, different apron because I took mine off and set it down and I can't find where I set it down. But I also didn't really look that hard either. Okay, now, this is nice and cool. I mean, I can literally touch the bottom of it. I wish I could tell you that this is a like one pot, one dish cookie recipe. I have mixed it all together in my cast iron skillet before, and if you have a big enough skillet, you could totally do it, but it's really pushing it and I always make a mess. So I'm going to go ahead and transfer my now cooled brown butter and sugar mixture into a mixing bowl just for the sake of my own sanity. And also probably should have done this before it cooled. Yeah, let me go ahead and give you that tip. Let me just recommend that. After you combine your butter and your sugar, you can right away go ahead and put it in another bowl or even combine it in another bowl. You could put your sugar in another bowl and then pour the butter on top of it while it's still hot. That would be fine too, just because that had cooled and solidified and was kind of hard to get out. The next thing you're going to want to do is add in your egg yolks. So this recipe calls for 3 egg yolks. Now I have made it before with the egg whites and it's not the same. The trick to a really good chocolate chip cookie is the egg yolk. I'm sure there is some science behind it. I do not know what that science is, but using the yolk and not the egg white, really, I'm telling you, it makes a really big difference. All right, now I have hand mixed these before and they turned out fine. So you can do that, but it is just so much easier to use your hand mixer. So I'm going to combine these egg yolks with the butter and the sugar and just beat for a minute. I like doing it that way, beating in the egg yolks just by themselves first before adding anything else, because I find that it loosens all of that back up again and gets it kind of wet all throughout before you start adding in other things, and it just keeps it from being one big clumpy mess. Next, we're going to add our starter. Now, don't let this fool you. This looks like a really beautiful, happy, active starter. I haven't fed this sucker in 3 days, so I would still consider this discard. You want 1 cup of starter. However, I just really like to weigh it because if you ask me, there's a whole thing about hydration and whatnot, and so I just like to know. I like to know exactly how much I'm putting in there and not just kind of more or less guess. So I'm just going to add 220 grams of starter into this bowl so I can weigh it. I'm glad this happened so that I can show you, because this has happened to me before. So that's all the starter I have, and it's not enough. I have 172 grams of starter when I need 220. And that's totally okay, because remember, the starter's not really even serving that much of a purpose. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to add enough flour to get me up to 200. Okay. So there, I've got 200 grams now. It was at 172, so I added roughly 30 grams of flour, and I'm going to add 20 grams of water. Now, that was already a really stiff starter that I put in there, and so that's why I'm adding a little bit of water, but not much, because remember that this is a cookie recipe, and you often do not add water to cookie recipes. You want it to be a very firm dough. So if that ever happens to you, and you have to beef up the starter that you're putting in, that's fine. You can totally do that. There's absolutely no harm to the recipe at all, but just be really cautious that you're not adding in too much water and making it really, really wet. You really want it to be more on the stiff side. And the same goes for, say that you have enough starter and that's a non-issue, but your starter is like really wet. You may have to add a little extra flour to your cookie dough. Like that's a very stiff starter, and so that's fine. That's what we're looking for. You don't want it to be really wet. So I'm going to add that in here. Smells really good. It's going to add a great flavor to our cookies. I'm going to go ahead and beat this starter in. Next, I'm going to add in 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and normally I'd add in 1 teaspoon of salt, but we did use a salted butter. So I'm just gonna do half a teaspoon of salt. But I'm being honest with you guys, I go heavy on the salt when I make chocolate chip cookies. Like a normal recipe is gonna tell you, if you know, don't use any salt if you use salted butter, like that's enough salt. I don't think so. I love a salty and sweet chocolate chip cookie. And even so, these won't be salty enough for me, and I'll add salt on top. I swear it's ridiculous. I love salty chocolate chip cookies. And most everybody that I run into also likes them. Occasionally, I'll get someone who thinks they're too salty, but most everybody really likes them that way. So use your own discretion there on how salty you want them to be. And then lastly, we're going to add in some vanilla, which I'm gonna have to put that in a video soon because I need to make more vanilla pronto. I have more vanilla beans and more spiced rum. I just haven't gotten around to doing it. I'm gonna say probably about a teaspoon. That's probably good. And then I'm just gonna very quickly beat this together. I'm not gonna get crazy. We still have to add in our flour. Now, our flour. Now, this is not a freshly milled recipe. I have not tried making these freshly milled yet. They're just so incredibly perfect the way they are that I think I'm probably gonna have to mess around a little bit with hydration and with them spreading and yada yada, the texture. Freshly milled flour is just a whole nother ballgame, but I know that many of you know that I do that, so this is not a freshly milled recipe. This is just this is an organic all-purpose flour, run-of-the-mill, normal recipe, and I will work on bringing you guys a freshly milled version of this because I actually want that myself. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. So standardly, you want 2.5 cups of flour here. However, this can get a little tricky, especially when it comes to like your sourdough, like we were talking about, and whatnot. And so what I like to do is, I've always had to do and have been able to do the full 2.5 cups. I've never needed less than that. I have occasionally needed more than that. And I'll show you here in a second kind of what I go off of to do that. So let's go ahead and get that mixed together and then we'll see what we're looking at. Actually though, there is one more thing. You always want to add your chocolate chips in the same time that you add in your flour. You guys, if you've been around here for any length of time, you know that I am a mini chocolate chip fan, even though these cookies are not for me. And I could totally just put regular sized chocolate chips. I pretty much only buy mini chocolate chips because I'm not a big chocolate fan and I like them when they're warm and it's gooey, but if I'm eating a room temperature chocolate chip cookie and I bite into a full-size chocolate chip, what? Not for me. So I like the minis, and that's pretty much all you're ever going to see me use on this channel. And I don't know what to tell you, just whatever your heart desires. The whole bag, half a bag, 2 bags, you do you. You do whatever feels good. And I like to add those in the same time as the flour. And then I will beat it with the beater on low for just a second. At this point, you don't really want to overmix. In fact, you could even get away with not beating it and just hand mixing it, which I may do, but I'm just going to beat it for a second to get the bulk of this flour incorporated. Now from here, let's see, I could probably use this thing. I go around and I scrape the sides, make sure I got all the flour, I scrape the bottom, and just kind of hand mix it for a second to make sure all the flour is really well incorporated, yada yada, typical cookie stuff. I'm definitely done with this, so we can get it out of the way. Okay, and then here's what I'll do. This is just personal. I'm just giving you kind of my tips here. And this is usually what I'll do to know if I need to add more flour. So I will mix it around with whatever utensil I'm using kind of the best I can and try to get as much of the flour as I can. There's still some spots in here where there's visible flour. So now I'm going to come in here with my hands and just kind of move it around a little bit, make sure that it really is all super well incorporated. Get all the flour off the bottom and off the sides with my hands. And I like doing it this way because it gives me a really good idea of what I'm working with. And if it is so sticky and so wet that you can't handle it well, and if you can't like pick it up in one big dough ball, it's too wet. This is borderline too wet. It did stick to me a bit, not crazy bad. I was able to pick it up in one ball. I do think I am going to add a little bit of flour because I weigh my cookie balls. Now this is, again, personal. It's up to you. I like having them all be the same size. I think it's very professional and very impressive when you hand somebody cookies and they're identical. It looks really professional home bakery, and I dig that. And so I'm going to handle all of this dough. I'm going to be reaching in here and making all of these into dough balls. And do you see how it's sticking to me like that? That's not ideal. It's going to get really annoying. And so I am going to add just a touch more flour. And what I'll usually do, so I keep a spoon. It's a pretty decent sized spoon. I keep this in here. And I just take a spoonful and just kind of sprinkle it on top like that. And then I go back to doing what I was just doing. I just kind of really work it in there. And you can feel the difference. So if it still doesn't feel right, then you can add more. It's going to be a little sticky. You don't want it to not be sticky at all, because now you're adding too much flour. Like, it's cookie dough. It's going to be a little sticky, but it should not be like this. This feels good. This coming, like, it's on me a little bit, but like mostly it's not. That feels good. That feels right. If it's covering your hands, it's far, far, far too wet. And you need to add a little bit of flour. So this feels great. I'm really happy with this. See, I can pick up the whole thing. That feels good. So now you have two choices. You can put it in the fridge for an hour and just leave it there. And then from there, turn it into balls. Or you could go ahead and turn it into balls now and put those in the fridge. I like to do the first. I like to just put the whole thing in the fridge for a while, because it makes it even a little bit easier to work with, although it does end up being a little bit cold. That's okay, I don't mind. And then I turn it into balls, and then usually I'll start baking them right then and there. I'll do the first batch, but I'll put the dough in the fridge in between batches, because you do want to keep it sort of cold, because that really aids in the spreading. You don't want them to spread too much, but you do want them to spread a little. And so that's kind of the idea here. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in the fridge. I don't usually cover it. It's not in there that long. And then we'll move on. All right. So in my experience with making these cookies, and I've made them many, many times, I like 60 grams. I've made 50 grams. I've made 77 grams, because 7's my lucky number. Those are huge. I find that 60 grams is a good sized cookie, but you get enough of them to make it worth your while. I've got my scale. I like to measure in grams. And so what I'll do, see, look, that's gorgeous. That's beautiful cookie dough. So I just throw some on. This is 94 grams. And then I just keep pulling off until I get to 60. And oftentimes, if it's 61 or 59, that's fine. And then I'll roll it in a ball. And this is the size cookie ball that you end up with. That's a really good size, and it ends up being a really good size cookie. And so I'm happy with that. I liked the 77 gram ones a lot, but they were honestly really big. And I think people enjoy, it's like a mind thing. Like, somebody would enjoy eating 2 cookies more than they'd enjoy eating one big cookie, I feel like, because they feel like they've had more of an experience. They've enjoyed it more. They had 2 instead of just 1. So that's typically what I go with. And then also, too, you got to judge it based on your, like, how many people are you trying to make cookies for? That makes a difference, because you can make them smaller. 60 grams is a really decent sized cookie. So you can, like I said, do 50 or even 40, 45, and they'd be a smaller cookie, because that's a good size. So up to you, but I find that 60 is a really nice middle ground. And so, yeah, that's what I do. I do take the time to go through and actually measure out every cookie ball, because, as I said, I really like to have a really consistent product. I think it looks nice, it feels professional, but of course you do not have to do that. If you want to just scoop them out, if you've got a cookie scoop that you really like, I don't know that this is, I'm sure you could probably scoop this. It's a really firm dough, so I like just pulling pieces off, but I'm sure you could scoop it out if you wanted to. So do whatever is easiest for you and suits what you're trying to do. I do need to go ahead and get these baking, because I've got to go soon. And so you preheat the oven to 350. With the 60 gram dough balls, I find that 12 minutes does pretty well. You're looking for them to be just teeniest bit brown on top. but you don't want them to be like too brown. But I don't like for them to be too light either, because then I have a hard time getting them off the cookie sheet, and I find that they will tear or, you know, break, and I don't want that either. So I find if you wait for them to be just a little bit brown on top, they are baked through enough and hold their shape enough that you can easily move them. And then obviously once they cool a little bit, they keep their shape just fine. So it is the next day. I had to rush out the house and I did not get to show you the cookies. So I have another batch in the oven here that I'm going to show you, but I had to close this out because there's a little trick that I want to show you. So first of all, this is what they look like when they're done. Do you see how they're just slightly brown? That's actually perfect. You want them to brown a little because you want the outside to have that nice crisp chocolate chip cookie, like a little bit of a crunch, but the inside is still nice and gooey without it being so soft that they fall apart. So here I've got my rack. I love, these are from Pampered Chef, but you can get just knockoff cheapy ones from Amazon, and I really love having these. So you're just gonna get underneath it, and do you see how it's holding together? It's not falling apart. And then the thing I like to do is just drop it onto the tray, like kind of aggressively, and it actually very perfectly makes the inside cave in, and it makes it like a perfectly flat, round cookie. And I know that's kind of silly, but that's what I like to do, just like that. And it makes them perfect. And as soon as these cool enough to handle, I'll show you. So this is quite literally the perfect chocolate chip cookie. Look at that. It's perfectly round. It's got that nice kind of like the cracks or whatever that make them look very bakery and professional. Perfectly round, nice and flat, but still has a good size and shape. They're just, I mean, they're literally so perfect. And then the outside has a little bit of a crispiness while the inside is still very chewy. Let's see. It's gonna be really hot. Oh, it's hot. These chocolate chip cookies are just, they're the best. And you know, I've tried to make so many different chocolate chip cookie recipes. I think being a home cook, a home baker, there's a few things that you really need to know how to make. And a really good chocolate chip cookie is one of those things. If you can pull that off, if you can make a consistently good chocolate chip cookie, you've got something in your arsenal that you can pull out anytime. If you need to bring something to your kid's school, if you have to bring a dessert to an event, if you have to bring something to Thanksgiving, if you want to just have a sweet treat in the house, if you want to have something in the freezer, if you want to give something as a gift, they're perfect. I love having a good chocolate chip cookie recipe, so I highly recommend this one. I'm going to, I think I'm going to put it on my website. I just struggle with it because I don't know exactly where this recipe came from, and I don't know what the original looks like. So it's hard for me to give credit if I end up putting up a recipe that's very similar to somebody else's, but I guess that's the nature of the internet. So I think I'll probably do it anyway so that you can have access to it in a place where you can easily access it. But yeah, these are delicious. And the last thing that I'll say is, my camera's zoomed in. The last thing that I'll say is, I give homemade gifts for Christmas these days because I've been trying to pay off my debt, and I haven't really been able to give like all of our family members like purchased Christmas gifts these last few years. So I've been working on my homemade gift skills, and actually it seems that many members of the family actually really enjoy that. So that's cool. This year, I think I want to do little baskets, and one of the things that I want to put in there are frozen chocolate chip cookie dough balls, like you know how we turned them into balls to bake them, vacuum sealed. So I think I'll do like either a dozen or maybe a half dozen, depending on how much time it takes me and how many of these I want to give out. A dozen or a half a dozen, fully made into the dough, into the balls, and vacuum sealed and given away. And I'll have to just like keep them in the freezer and then take them out right before we leave for the event to give as gifts, and then tell them to put them in the freezer when they get home. And then that way the people who receive it can pop them in the oven and bake them anytime that they want chocolate chip cookies, but they don't have to eat them right away. Because that's the thing about giving baked goods around the holidays. Most people are already consuming a lot of baked goods. So I like the idea of giving people something that they can bake later so that they're not having to consume it right now. They're not pressured to feel like, oh, we were given these as a gift, we have to eat them now. When they're already eating so many sweets, they can have them in February, March, whatever. So I just wanted to give you that idea. That's a good thing to do with these around the holiday season. And then, of course, you can just bring them to Thanksgiving, bring them to Christmas, bring them to your friends' giving parties, whatever. But I really hope that you'll give them a try. I'm really happy to be back in the kitchen bringing you recipes again. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and I can't wait to see you in my next video. Have faith and keep moving forward. Bye.